I bought the cabin on a foggy October morning when the realtor's truck barely made it up the washed-out gravel road and the trees leaned in like they were eavesdropping. The structure itself was ancient, 150 years old according to county records, with hand-hewn beams, a stone chimney, and a roof that sagged like a tired spine. Most people saw a lost cause. I saw history worth saving. The deed was clean, the survey precise, and the property sat far outside any mapped homeowners association boundary. I closed quietly, paid in full, and planned to restore it slowly, respectfully, and legally. The first few weeks were peaceful. I cleared invasive brush, stabilized the foundation, and cataloged what could be salvaged. Old horseshoes turned up in the dirt. Names carved into beams hinted at families long gone. I pulled permits from the county, hired a preservation contractor, and followed every rule down to the letter. Neighbors waved occasionally from distant properties, curious but friendly. There were no signs, no gates, no HOA notices on doors. That illusion shattered the morning a luxury SUV barreled up the road and stopped inches from my truck. She stepped out like she owned the mountain. Perfect hair, oversized sunglasses, phone already recording. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask questions. She pointed at the cabin and said, "You can't do this." I calmly explained that I owned the property and was restoring a historic structure under county permit. Her face twisted, not confused but offended. She laughed sharply and said the words that changed everything. "That cabin belongs to my son. It's his inheritance." I assumed she was mistaken, maybe clinging to an old rumor or a failed bid. I showed her the deed on my phone. I offered to walk her through the survey markers. She waved it all away and raised her voice, so it echoed through the trees. She claimed the land had been promised decades ago, that the sale was fraudulent, that I was trespassing on family legacy. When I suggested she contact the county recorder, she snapped back that she was with the HOA and didn't need to check paperwork. That was the first time I heard the acronym. I told her plainly that there was no HOA jurisdiction here, that I wasn't a member, and that she needed to leave. Her shock turned to fury. She threatened fines, liens, and lawyers. She accused me of stealing history from her child. When I didn't budge, she promised consequences and sped off, tires spraying gravel like punctuation. By the end of the week, the consequences arrived. Stop work notices taped to my gate with unofficial letterheads. Anonymous complaints filed with the county alleging environmental damage. A man claiming to be an HOA compliance officer showed up and left when I asked for credentials. Each move felt coordinated, desperate, and sloppy. I realized then this wasn't about rules or preservation. It was about entitlement colliding with reality, and someone very used to getting their way was about to learn how solid a recorded deed really is. By the time began, the tone around the cabin had shifted from nuisance to pressure campaign. The county cleared the fake stop work notice within hours, confirming it wasn't issued by any department they recognized. Still, the damage was done. Contractors grew cautious. Neighbors started asking pointed questions. Someone wanted me to blink. I didn't. I went methodical. I pulled the full chain of title, every transfer back to the late 1800s, and ordered a fresh survey with GPS markers tied to the county grid. The surveyor laughed when I asked if there was any HOA overlay. "Closest one ends 3 ridgelines over," he said, tapping the map. "You're clean." I printed copies anyway, the way you do when you sense theatrics ahead. They came the following Saturday. 2 cars this time. HOA Karen returned with a man in a polo shirt and clipboard who introduced himself as the association's attorney. He stood where the old wagon path meets my driveway and announced they were issuing a cease and desist for unauthorized alterations to community heritage. I asked which community. He said the name of an HOA I'd never heard of. I asked for their recorded jurisdiction. He said it was understood. Asked for a book and page number. He stopped smiling. Karen escalated. She began narrating to her phone, accusing me of erasing her son's future, of exploiting loopholes, of buying stolen land. When I told them to leave, the attorney tried to hand me papers. I refused service and asked them again to exit my property. That's when Karen shouted the inheritance line, louder this time, as if volume could rewrite history. The sheriff arrived 40 minutes later, called by them, not me. I met him at the gate with permits, the deed, the survey, and a copy of the county email invalidating the stop work notice. He listened. He asked a few questions. Then he walked over to Karen and the attorney. Their voices rose. The attorney gestured at the cabin.
Karen pointed at me.
The sheriff returned alone and said, "They don't have standing here." He told them to leave and warned them about harassment. You'd think that would end it. It didn't. Complaints multiplied. The county received claims about wetlands that didn't exist, wildlife violations tied to species not present, even a forged letter alleging I'd cut timber outside my parcel. Each time, inspectors came, checked, and left. Each time I documented. Dates, names, photographs. I wasn't building a case out of spite. I was insulating the project against sabotage. The real turn came when a neighbor, quiet, elderly, and clearly fed up, stopped by with a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings and probate notices from 30 years ago. Karen's family had once leased grazing rights near the cabin. The lease expired. They never owned the estate. Her inheritance was a story told so often she believed it. Worse, she'd tried to muscle previous owners with threats until one finally sold to someone else.
Me.
Armed with that, I sent a certified letter demanding they cease interference, attached evidence, and notified them that further harassment would be pursued. The attorney replied once, vaguely, then went silent. Karen didn't. She showed up again, alone, screaming from the road about stolen legacies and corrupt counties. This time, I didn't engage. I let the camera run, let the facts stack. Because the louder she got, the clearer it became. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a meltdown headed somewhere public and irreversible. Started when Karen's outrage crossed from harassment into something that required a lawyer. I woke up to a certified envelope taped to my gate, an emergency injunction filed in civil court claiming irreparable harm to a family inheritance site. It was sloppy, emotional, and full of statements that could be disproven with a single record search. Still, it was a court filing, which meant I had to take it seriously. I called my attorney before I finished my coffee. We met that afternoon with a full paper trail spread across the table. Deed, survey, permits, inspector reports, photos of forged notices, and video of Karen screaming from the roadside. My attorney didn't look worried. He looked annoyed at them. "This is a fishing expedition," he said, "and a bad one." He filed a response the same day, attaching exhibits that mapped ownership cleanly and showed a pattern of interference. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Karen arrived with her son in tow, both dressed as if appearance might substitute for evidence. She cried when she spoke, telling the judge how she'd grown up believing the cabin was meant for her family, how the sale was immoral, how I'd rushed in to exploit a technicality. Her attorney leaned heavily on emotion and used the word heritage like a talisman. When it was our turn, my attorney didn't raise his voice. He just handed up the documents. The judge asked Karen's lawyer one question. "Where's your recorded interest?" There was a pause, too long. He tried to pivot to the old grazing lease. The judge asked if it was active. It wasn't. He asked if it conveyed ownership. It didn't. He asked if there was any HOA jurisdiction recorded against the parcel. There wasn't. The judge sighed, the way people do when patience runs out. Then the tone changed. The judge addressed Karen directly and explained, carefully, that inheritance requires ownership, not expectation. That feelings don't supersede deeds. That harassment through filings can carry consequences. He denied the injunction and warned that further frivolous actions could result in sanctions. Karen stared at me like I'd taken something from her. In truth, she'd never had it. Outside the courtroom, her son confronted me. He wasn't angry, he was embarrassed. He asked why no one had told him the truth. I told him the same thing the record said. The land was never theirs. He walked away without another word. Back at the cabin, restoration resumed. Walls straightened. Stonework repaired. History preserved. But Karen wasn't done. She pivoted tactics, shifting from courts to community. Social media posts accused me of land theft. Anonymous flyers appeared in nearby towns. None named me directly, but everyone knew. I kept restoring. I kept documenting. The final straw came when she contacted the Historical Society, claiming I was destroying a protected site. The society sent an expert. He toured the cabin, reviewed my permits, and thanked me for doing it right. He wrote a letter commending the work. I framed it. Began with a knock that felt different, measured, official, and long overdue. A process server handed Karen paperwork the same week the Historical Society's letter went public. It wasn't my doing directly, but it was the consequence of everything she'd put in motion. The county had opened an inquiry into repeated false complaints, and the court had approved a hearing on sanctions tied to her injunction attempt. For the first time, the pressure wasn't on me. She tried to flip the script one last time. A glossy letter went out to nearby property owners claiming a mediation session was scheduled to resolve the cabin dispute. There was no such mediation. My attorney sent a cease and desist citing misrepresentation. The letter came back stamped received. The next day, the post stopped. At the sanctions hearing, Karen didn't speak much. Her attorney did, carefully. He argued passion, misunderstanding, family lore. The judge listened, then referenced the record, forged notices, baseless filings, repeated law enforcement calls, and harassment warnings ignored. Sanctions were imposed. Modest, but unmistakable. Filing restrictions followed. The message was clear. This ends now. Meanwhile, restoration crossed a milestone. The roof was replaced with period-accurate shingles. The chimney drew clean. A plaque from the Historical Society was approved, noting the cabin's age and the care taken in its preservation. Neighbors visited. Some apologized for believing the rumors. I invited them in and showed the work. Sunlight hit the old beams the way it must have a century ago. Karen drove by once slowly.
She didn't stop.
She didn't shout. She didn't record. She looked smaller, quieter, like someone finally meeting the limits of a story she'd told herself for decades. Her son sold his nearby lot and moved away. The HOA she'd leaned on issued a statement clarifying it had no authority over the estate. Quiet corrections replaced loud lies. The county closed its inquiry with a note. Future false reports could result in penalties. My attorney closed the file. I framed the deed next to the historical letter, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what reality looks like when the cabin stood restored and the conflict stood resolved. Not through shouting or dominance, but through records, restraint, and time. Karen's inheritance claim faded into what it had always been, a belief without backing. And in its place stood something sturdier. Ownership earned, history preserved, and a lesson written in public filings for anyone who thinks volume can replace truth. Wasn't about victory laps or rubbing salt in old wounds. It was about what remained after the noise died down. The cabin stood finished at last, not polished into something new, but restored into what it had always been meant to be. The beams were straight, the stone hearth held warmth again, and the floorboards told their quiet stories with every step. History had survived, not because someone demanded it, but because someone respected it. People still ask about Karen. The truth is, she disappeared from the mountain. Her HOA position quietly changed. Her name stopped showing up in filings. The inheritance story became a cautionary tale neighbors told newcomers, usually ending with, "Check the records." That's how these things settle, not with explosions, but with silence. What stayed with me was the lesson. Ownership isn't loud. It doesn't need threats or theatrics. It lives in documents, surveys, and the patience to let facts do their work. The moment Karen tried to force a belief onto reality, reality pushed back, and it did so without anger. Just ink and time. The cabin now hosts family and friends. Sometimes historians visit. Sometimes neighbors stop by just to sit on the porch and look out over the trees. A small sign near the door tells the truth plainly. Built circa 1875, restored with care, privately owned. No drama. No acronyms. Just facts. I kept every record from the ordeal in a single folder, Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. When someone claims power they don't have, the answer isn't escalation, it's documentation. The system isn't perfect, but when you meet it prepared, it still works. Karen's son wrote once. He apologized. He said he'd grown up with a story that felt real until it met paper. He thanked me for restoring the place instead of tearing it down. I wrote back wishing him well. Some inherit land. Others inherit myths. Only one survives scrutiny. In the end, the estate didn't belong to a past that never existed. It belonged to the present, and to the future it could now have. That's the quiet truth Karen never wanted to hear, and the one the cabin had been waiting for all along.